So we are going to talk about general feedback on the assignment one from our session one. There were some common themes across. I have to say this. I think all of you did a great job. And it is very clear that you guys really understood the concepts of story structure, right? It was very, very evident in every single assignment. Then we will talk about some facts about ideas, right? There's a lot of talk about ideas, where they come from, how they happen, how authors get them and things like that. So we will cover some facts about ideas just to make sure that we are not living in myths. We are really talking facts. Then we will get into where do ideas come from. One of the very common, I would say, complaint from aspiring writers is that they don't get ideas. So this is the most foundational thing to understand how to generate ideas. Then we'll get into how famous authors discover their ideas. So we will take some examples and we will get into how they got their ideas, just to make you understand how the process works. And then we will talk about ideas in more details. And one thing that we want to talk about there is that ideas don't have to be about world-changing themes. There are plenty of interesting ideas which are about common things. Our day-to-day observations lead us to those ideas. And then we will get into what you, as an aspiring writer, have to do to get ideas. What are the things that you can do? Take care, right? What are the things that you can focus on every day? Then we'll talk about homework as usual. All right. So I know this is like an eye chart here, but I wanted to put all of this together in one slide in terms of common themes from assignment one. So first and foremost, longer descriptions on average than expected. So while each one of you demonstrated that you really adopted the concept, you really understood the concept of story structure, the descriptions were a little longer on average than expected. And I know it's hard to kind of describe complex stories in 5 to 10 sentences. It's really hard because there's just so much that happens in these stories. The real reason behind that is that as a writer, you need to get into the habit of being very succinct with your narration, right? If it is a character in your book or in your story, your character can say anything. Your character can take forever to talk about something because that's something about that character, which is totally fine. But not being succinct as an author is not fine, right? As a narrator. So when you write as a narrator, right, that text has to be very succinct. When you have a character speak up and say something, those dialogues can be anything, right? There may be a character who doesn't get to the point, right, and can speak 2 pages before getting to the point. That's totally fine, right? So just understand that concept really well. And that's where writing is rewriting phrase becomes very important, right? Once you write something, you have to do multiple revisions to ensure it is very succinct as a narrator. Wherever narrator is describing something, it is very, very succinct and crisp. And I have 2 quotes here, which are very interesting quotes. I find them very interesting and motivating. So one is from Mark Twain, very famous writer. He said, "I did not have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one," right? So just understand, writing a short one takes more time than writing a longer one, because you have an idea, and if you don't pay attention to being succinct and to the point and crisp, the same idea you might take 4 pages, or same letter you might take 4 pages to write. But if you spend more time and say, okay, now I'm going to make this shorter, but communicate more effectively, then you can probably do it in half a page. So that's precisely the point here. And then another one from Henry David here. Not that the story needs to be long, but it will take a long time to make it short, right? So usually how it happens, you focus on idea, you focus on describing it, you focus on describing plot, characters, themes, and then you don't worry a lot about being crisp, succinct, and short. But as you take more iterations, you try to pay a lot of attention to that aspect. And that's because when you're writing, you just don't want to be too worried about how the end product will look, right? Because there will be multiple iterations. So you're more focusing on what's happening, the storytelling part of it. But as you go on and develop further and further, you revise your work to be more succinct. All right, so that's the first and foremost feedback that I have. And the ask was to have your summary or your story within 5 to 10 sentences. And I think I would say sometimes it went over like 20 sentences and things like that. So just something to think about. Always strive for being very succinct. Now, that doesn't mean that you should forcefully cut things that you should have there, right? So naturally, if something has to be long, it has to be long. But this is all about, can you convey the same idea more effectively in a shorter way? The second one here is it's good practice to first identify the climax in the story and then work from there to identify other elements. And the reason for that is that climax is probably the toughest thing to kind of pinpoint, because story is all about tension, right? There is always some tension in the story, because if there's no tension, the readers won't be excited reading it, or viewers of a movie won't watch it, right? So there's always tension. And I think what it comes down to is you compare different parts of the creation or a movie or a novel and figure out which point is the highest point of the tension, right? And typically it is not a very, I would say, big duration or big part in the whole movie or book. It is typically shorter, right? It is almost like you can say, here is the climax, right? And that happens, if it is a movie, it happens within like duration of 5-10 minutes, right? As you can see on the right hand side, I've drawn two pictures. And there are two reasons to draw this. One is to show you that climax is the tipping point of tension. So tension rises and then after it comes down, because you can't end a movie or novel typically at the highest point, right? Because your viewer or your reader won't be satisfied. He or she might have a lot of questions, right? So falling action and resolution is important. But like I have said earlier as well, there are definitely exceptions of everything. Um, as a writer, you will see that more and more. The second part that I want to talk about here is reading through some of the assignments. It was kind of apparent to me that there is some notion that climax happens at the same point every time. So exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and announcement or resolution. And I think it was apparent in some cases that the climax happens almost in the middle, right? And there has to be a falling action which has certain duration and sometimes has equal to rising action. So that's not true. It depends on the story, right? Different stories have climax at different points. And I think it was Olivia who asked this question in the last session, a very good question, right? So where exactly climax happen and how much is revealed in the climax is all tied to the story. It's all tied to what kind of writer you are, all ties to how you want your audience to feel like, right? Sometimes you reveal slowly, sometimes you reveal in one big kind of bang, right? So it depends on what kind of story you're writing. Very often climax is really toward the end of the story, right? Because climax reveals, a big part of the theme, and then it is also highest point of the tension. So if you have climax somewhere in the middle or earlier in the story, your reader or viewer may not be as interested toward the later part in the story. So, like I said, there's no set rule. So don't think that climax is always happening in the middle and falling action has to be of significant duration. Sometimes falling action and announcement or resolution, they happen very quickly. And sometimes like within 5 minutes of a movie, last 5 minutes, right? So that part is very flexible based on what kind of story this is, what your real goal is, right? With revealing the theme of the story and what kind of writer you are, right? So that is a very important aspect of writing. I just want to make sure it's covered here in answering, some of the observations, concerns I saw in assignment one. I covered the next one. The falling action doesn't have to be as much in duration as rising action. So it could be very quick. It is generally lesser duration compared to rising action, because rising action is when you're building to the highest tension. And once you've done that, you have almost revealed most of the theme of the story. And then you want to quickly get to the falling action and resolution. So that's very typically what happens. Always remember that readers have no prior understanding or knowledge of your story. So being a writer and working on your story continuously for a long duration of time, what naturally happens is that you develop very intimate understanding of your own story. And it's very hard at times to identify with your readers, right? What they will understand, what they will not understand, what might be coming across as a gap to them, right? So always keep that in mind, right? That when you are telling a story, look at it as somebody who doesn't know that story at all. And whenever you introduce a new idea, whenever you introduce a new character, whenever you explain something, you take a stand of a reader, because you have an imagination going on in your mind. It's almost like a movie playing in your mind, and you know everything about that movie, and you feel like, okay, if I describe this, the reader will understand it. But the reader never gets to see that movie. You need to produce that movie for the reader, right? So just ensure you're always thinking from reader's perspective, because otherwise at times your story might seem spotty to readers because you saw the full movie and you describe some points from that movie. Now it's left up to the reader to connect those points, right? So it's not a continuous experience for your reader if you don't think that way. Next one, when you introduce a new character, establish some connection, context of that character to the story as to why that character is introduced, who is that character anyway, whether in relation to the your movie or your book or story, right? Unless you really want that character to be intentionally not known to the reader, the intent of the character or what that character is, right? So that's a totally different, idea. But very often you want readers to understand how a character is placed in the setting, what's the context, how character, what's character's role in that particular story. So just think about that. In few assignments, and I left comments there, a character's name was used without much context. And that kind of confuses and reader at times. Exposition doesn't necessarily mean the first scene of or the first page. It should capture the overall setting or background. So in some assignments, it was almost like first scene being described, right? Or the first page, whatever narrator talked about that story was described. So just know that exposition is not about the first scene or the first page of the book, because that necessarily may not reveal the entire settings or background that you want to reveal as a writer. Sometimes it might take 1/4 of the book to just do that, or 10% of the book. And sometimes it might be just first page itself, right? So there's no, even though these diagrams show on the timeline, on the duration line, almost equal parts, that's not how it happens. Any one of these parts could expand more or can contract to become very little. So exposition can be 1 page or can be 20 pages or can be quarter of the book. When you describe exposition, you describe the true setting that author might have taken 20 pages to get to. So just want to clarify on that, because in some of the assignments, I saw that it was description of the first scene. And like I said, very impressive. All of you have gotten all the concepts. So big kudos to all of you. But as we start on journey to become a writer, we need to be our own critiques. We need to really look at everything we do very, very critically and see what additional we can do to make things better, right? So there is nothing perfect here. Keep working on things. Keep working on your creation until you are really satisfied. All right. So last one is including a bit more on why certain thing is happening will help reader, will help as a connecting tissues to the reader. Right? So reader will know, hey, so this is happening because that thing was like this, or that character wanted it, or this situation demands it. So always think about that. And again, it goes back to you being a writer. You have a movie playing in your brain, but your readers, they are totally dependent on you. Right? They are already at a disadvantage because they don't see the story the way you see. Right? So always remember that. All right. So ideas, probably the biggest thing when you want to become a writer, the most fundamental thing, the most talked about thing. Ideas, where do they come from? How they happen? How big writers get ideas? So before getting into all of that, I just wanted to list some facts about ideas. So when you think about ideas, you're not going by what you search on Google, what people personally think about them. These facts are a result of a lot of study that I've done and a lot of other people have done. Right? These are not really personal opinions listed here. So just want you guys to be grounded in few facts about ideas, because general feeling is for people who are aspiring to be writers that they can't get ideas, that all the ideas are taken. Like so many movies, millions of books have been written, and there are no more a good way to get ideas, right? Those kind of things are not true. So, firstly, ideas are not all gone. There are millions of books written, there are thousands of movies made, but there are still as many ideas there as were there 100 or 200 or 1,000 years ago. In fact, there are even more ideas today, right? You know why? Because we have seen more evolution than people who saw it 100 years ago. A lot more things happen since then, right? So never ever think that because somebody made a movie called Room, now that idea is taken, that overall makes other people run out of ideas. Not at all true. You look at the kind of movies are made, the kind of books that explore new ideas. Once it happens, you say, oh, wow, how did he get or she get that idea? Where does she get it from? Right? So, bottom line is don't ever worry about it. Don't ever think the world is short of ideas. Doesn't matter how many ideas humans explore. All right. Second one is everyone gets them. The only factor there is that lead people to believe they don't get it because they don't notice them. They don't take a note of them. Right? And many don't even observe and realize that they get ideas. The key point here is you need to be always looking and realizing and spotting the ideas, right? They always come to you. It's just that you don't realize they're coming to you. And even if you realize, you don't note them down and they're lost. The third one is when first appear, ideas are not fully formed. They take shape over time. So when something flashes your mind, it is generally not in its best shape. So you identify it, you make a note of it, you keep it at the back of your mind, and maybe over a few weeks, months, or years, it develops in an idea that you think has potential for detailing out further. Or even when you realize that this idea could be detailed out further, you might be looking at only 10% potential of that idea at that time. Because what happens is, as you start working on the idea, you realize as you develop more and more the true potential of that idea. Now, there are two things that can happen. You will end up realizing this idea is not as good as you thought it was. That's fine. Let's move on to another idea. Or maybe give that idea more time. Stop working on it, move on to other things. Often happens that writers come back to their ideas that they didn't think were good enough. The second thing that can happen is you realize this idea is 10 times better than what you thought because it opens up more avenues of thinking when you start detailing it out. Sometimes when 50% detailed out, authors feel the idea is 10 times, 20 times better than what they thought initially. Right? And that's an ongoing process. As they develop more, they get that idea becomes even shines even more. So two extremes, you may end up thinking or deciding that idea was not worthy enough. It cannot be detailed out in something interesting, or you will realize this is much, much, much better, even, how it seems at the first go. So just think about that. Most ideas are not fully formed. They are actually very far from it. But identify them, put them down, and they kind of stay at the back of your mind. And they may even make part of some bigger idea as sub-ideas, right? They are often found in places you expect them the least. So don't force yourself to say, okay, I now need to get an idea. I need to do these activities. Right? So, for example, you might be driving and suddenly out of nowhere, an idea will flash your mind. Or maybe you're doing dishes, an idea may flash. Or you might be studying for an exam and suddenly an idea will emerge, right? So don't think that doing something specific will cause those ideas to emerge. They emerge anywhere and while you're doing anything. Lastly, they don't need to be about world changing themes. So I touched on this earlier as well. So when a lot of people think about writing books, they're thinking about big themes, right? Themes that might, you know, revolutionize this world, that might, sound big, two countries fighting over something, or, a big social cause, right? It doesn't have to be about world changing themes. And there are plenty of examples in best selling works that you can see this happening. People write about very, very tiny things, right? Very, very normal things, but they write about them in a way which makes it super exciting, super interesting for the readers or viewers, right? Sometimes it might just be a different perspective of a very simple event, right? So these are, some of the facts about the ideas, that I wanted to cover with you guys, so that when you think about ideas, you don't think about people only, certain people getting these ideas, or authors getting these ideas, or, people in certain positions getting these ideas. These ideas are everywhere. Everyone gets them. I think it's important to kind of observe them and take a note about them. So where do the ideas come from? We talked about this a little bit. So I would say very briefly, there are only two sources of these ideas at a broad level. Something that flashes in your brain, right? So ideas can flash in your brain out of nowhere. Your brain is one of the most interesting things in the world. It does a lot of things without you consciously doing it, right? So sometimes it connects so many things, so many experiences in the way that you cannot imagine, and flashes thoughts, ideas to you, right? So that is one of the two broad ways that ideas can come to you. Now, how do you increase chances that your brain does it more often? Is by exposing yourself to new experiences, situations, thinking. Right? More you think about things, more you reflect on what's happening around, the brain becomes more powerful in connecting thousands of events, thousands of experiences, and emerge, push ideas to you, right? So that is something you can do in order to get more ideas, get your brain to push more ideas to you. Second category is you generate them, right? You cannot depend on your brain to give you ideas. You have to generate them, and it happens a lot. So many books have been written, in this category, right? So not all books are about ideas that just flashed in authors' brains. A lot of books, ideas were generated by authors, right? So you have full control over them, unlike the previous one. They just flash in your brain, come from nowhere. But the second category of ideas, you generate them. And generally, you think about situations, interesting events, interesting settings, interesting characters, hypothetical situations, and generate ideas from there. So we will get into more details as we go into further slides here. All right. So this is detailing more about the ideas that flash in your brain. So, like I said, ideas generally flash randomly, unexpectedly. It's rarely a complete idea that flashes in your brain. It may just be a situation, event, character, setting, plot, place, etc., or even a dialogue, even just a sentence that somebody, just flash in your brain. Hey, how cool is this sentence, right? It often needs a lot of building on it. So you cannot just think about, hey, that's the idea and that's my story, right? So you have to get those ideas and then let them bake in your brain, um, and then use them in the stories as you expand or develop your stories based on many ideas that you get. It can appear while doing anything. We talked about that. You might be doing the most mundane thing and the best idea occurs to your brain or you. It can appear while you are detailing out other ideas, right? Or dealing with other ideas. So you might be working on another idea, which is totally different, and this flashes you, right? So that may be another way it flashes in your brain. It's likely you get as many ideas as famous author does, but you don't realize it. So, like I said earlier, everybody gets plenty of ideas. Don't think that you don't get as many ideas as a famous author does, right? I think it's all about observing, noting down, and then treating that idea thereafter. It's likely you will forget about it if you don't immediately write it down. So, like I mentioned in the first session, the human brain is not capable enough to host all the ideas and provide free access at any given point of time to you of all the ideas that you thought about or came to your mind, right? The way brain functions is that there is a memory where you can randomly access things very quickly, and the majority of information in the brain resides in a memory where it is really a lot of effort to get it out from there, right? So just think about that. So you might not ever remember that idea if you don't note it down. So very, very important fact. Now, second category of ideas is you generate them. So first category, you can't do much. You can open yourself to new experiences, new situations, think about situations, events, reflect on them. That's the best you can do about first category. The second category here, you can generate ideas. You control this part much more. So one thing you can do, you mix the list of existing sub ideas to build a new one. So you might have collected dialogues, events, situations, characters over a long period of time, for years, for months. You can sit and say, okay, how can I look at everything here and generate an idea for a novel or a story, right? And use maybe 30% of all the sub ideas, sub situations, subplots that you have in there. That is one way. Second is study your thoughts and feelings and take note of what matters the most to you. What makes you happy, sad, bored, angry, etc. Think about that. And what recent incidents got you thinking? Because you have to have passion about what you write about. Unless you know your emotions and what makes you engaged deeply in certain things, it is very hard to get that passion. And then force yourself to imagine typically an unordinary situation, right? This is where you think about, what if I wake up one day and I'm turned into a dog? Or what if I am alone on Mount Everest? So situations. What if I meet this person, this kind of person, right? What if I come to my house and find this, right? So force yourself to imagine situations that are not ordinary situations, right? So that's third way you generate ideas. And then the last one I've listed here is you develop on a dream about something odd or interesting, right? A lot of books have been written as a result of dreams, ideas that flash in the dream, or sub ideas, or some plots and things like that, right? So I won't say these are the only ways to generate your ideas, but I would say a lot of ideas are generated using these tools and techniques. So starting here will be a good thing for you guys, right? All right. So I talked about generating ideas and throwing some non-ordinary situations out there for yourself to generate some ideas. These are some writing prompts that I used in one of the past on the spot creative writing contests. I'm not going to go into all of these, but the point is create your own writing prompts. So if you look at this and if you start writing about them, it's not your idea. It's not originally from your brain, right? But it's still important. When we go for contests, it gives the participants a quick way to get an idea and start writing story on it, right? But think about, as a writer, you don't want to act on others' writing prompts. You want your own writing prompts. So I would say, look at these offline, each one of these, and there are plenty on Google if you Google for them, and come up with your own writing prompts. The what if situations, what if this happens, right? And then generate ideas from there. So here are some examples to everything we have said so far. You will see that happening in the works of famous writers here. And all of this information is publicly available, right? So I did not personally generate it. It is available publicly there. They have said this in interviews or it is listed on some website. But I wanted to show it here in order to make you understand that authors are not really born authors, right? They're not born storytellers. They are just like us, right? So J.K. Rowling, I was traveling back to London on my own on a crowded train, and the idea for Harry Potter simply fell into my head. Just happened. Stephen King, you all know he's one of the best storytellers of all times because story ideas seem to come quite literally from nowhere, sailing at you right out of the empty sky. Two previously unrelated ideas come together and make something new under the sun. Your job isn't to find these ideas, but to recognize them when they show up, right? Recognizing them is where most people fail, right? So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but go through them offline and see how these authors have gotten these ideas really from nowhere. It was not as much about them, right, or their skills or their talent. It was more about discipline of them acknowledging, noting it down for detailing it later on. And here are some ideas to my point that they don't have to be world changing. There are plenty of very, very good books that have been written on ideas that were not about political unrest, armies fighting or the world ending, things like that, right? So the Boxman, a man decides to drop out of society and live inside of a giant cardboard box, right? Just, it could have been a writing prompt for anyone. The nose, a man wakes up one morning without his nose. His nose escapes to run around St. Petersburg, climbing the ladder of Russian society. Now, we will cover the genres in later sections of this course. So this is magic realism. Imagine a nose walking and working its way through the corporate ladder. The mezzanine. A guy takes the escalator to the mezzanine. It's not a novel with traditional characters, conflict, and a plot. The mezzanine takes place almost entirely in the main character's head. Metamorphosis, one of the best creations ever, in my opinion. A salesman wakes up one day to find that he has transformed into a giant insect. So none of these ideas are about world-changing themes. They're very, very regular what ifs, right? What if I get caught in a box? What if I turn into a vermin? Think about that. What you can do to get ideas. So here is the kind of summary of it all. Keep an idea book, jot down any ideas or sub ideas flashing in your mind that you find interesting. Could be about settings, situations, characters, events, small anecdotes, hypothetical conversations, plots, subplots. Keep noting them down. Don't get into thinking that I have to detail it right now, because then you might not be allowing it to evolve naturally in your brain. Don't judge an idea too soon. It may look very ordinary, but might have big potential. It takes months and years sometimes before you really understand potential of an idea. Always practice thinking what if and note down interesting ideas. So we talked about this as well. Train your brain to be on the lookout and spot ideas. So like I said, the big distinction factor between successful writers and people who are aspiring writers and never get there is observing ideas, taking note of the ideas, right? That is the big factor that distinguishes famous authors or authors from people who are aspiring but never get there, right? So the next one here is, when you wake up in the morning, try to remember any interesting dreams that you had and note them down. Believe me, if not, if you don't get a big idea from this, at least you will get many interesting situations and characters that you can use in your books, right? So it doesn't have to be that dream gives you a big idea, and often it does, but at least it will give you a lot of situations, characters, sub ideas, subplots. Don't worry about people judging you for writing about a particular theme, right? So a lot of people are very afraid of, if I write about this, am I, are my parents going to judge me? Is my friend going to judge me, right? So if you're writing about a murder, it doesn't mean that you have a murderer's mind, or if you secretly wish to do a murder, right? Writing is a form of art. And like in painting, the freedom of thought is very important. It's the same way for writing. Now, I would tell you though that people end up judging, when you write about a character, they will ask you, oh, so did you meet somebody like this? Or did you ever feel like this yourself, right? Don't worry about that. Writers get all of that, but don't judge yourself. Don't stop writing about a theme because just you're worried that what others are going to think about that. All right, so there's a little bit of repetition here, but I just want to make sure you guys know what is next section here, right? You can talk about all these things, but what do I do, right? And I covered that in previous slide, which is more like ongoing activities, ongoing things that you should do. And here I covered some exercises for you to discover ideas, right? And you challenge yourself for more and more such stuff. Think about the most horrible experience you ever had and how it could have become worse. Think about when someone disappointed you the most. Think about an event reported on news that you couldn't get out of your mind for days and weeks. Sometimes stuff happens and you remember it for whatever reason, for sad or good, happy reasons. You remember it for not only months, even years, right? So think about something like that. Think about a vivid dream you once had and you still remember it. Think about the most unusual person you've ever met. Think about a loss you ever experienced. It could be mental loss, physical loss, relationship loss. Think about an event. If you had all the powers, what changes would you make to it? Right? An event happened. What is your take on it? Right? How can you rewrite that event? And I have included a link to a page that has book summaries for short, short summaries for young adult books you may want to look at and get some more ideas, like how, what ideas have been explored in those books, just to get your thinking going. So now that I'm going to ask you in homework to come up with ideas, I wanted to cover how you should summarize your ideas, right? Just a thought. And you are your own judge when it comes down to how is the best way you want to, summarize your idea. So a good way is to look at descriptions of books, description of movies. And I find IMDb to be a very good place for good descriptions then that don't reveal much, right? So if you go to IMDb, search for a movie, the short description that comes at the top describes the setting, but doesn't give away any plot or themes that might ruin the movie for you, right? So I've taken some of those descriptions here, right, in terms of how you can summarize an idea without really revealing a lot about it, right? So when you come up with an idea as your home assignment, just look at these kind of descriptions and then try to utilize the same kind of template for your idea. Because the part that is not apparent here in all of these, the way they have been described is it generates that interest in the person who's looking to watch a movie, right? The way these are described, you will feel curious about them. And they're just like 2-3 sentences here. So this is the homework that we are going to do for our assignment 2. List 3 original ideas that you would love to write stories about. It could be an existing idea or existing ideas, right? You can brainstorm ideas with the tools and techniques we talked about. And if the above two don't work, then think about what if scenarios. Think about your own writing prompts and then pick up ideas from there. But it has to be original, right? So no going to the Google searching for ideas to use. Generate some ideas, generate some situations that you think that haven't been talked about. Summarize each of your ideas in 5 or less sentences. So first assignment, I kind of still, I was flexible and still kind of went through every assignment, even though there were like a lot of text and descriptions. I'm going to be more stringent starting second assignment. So challenge yourself, and it is in your benefit to restrict yourself to 5 sentences or less, right? For each one of those ideas. So 3 ideas, 5 sentences or less each. And then pick up the one that you think you like and you would like to expand on, right? So if you look at the assignment template, there are 3 place for 3 ideas, and then there's a place for which one do you want to pick. And then I will look at your work, and then I'm gonna either say, I like your approach. I think this idea has a lot of potential. Or I would say, hey, how about this idea? Did you think about this potential in this idea, right? And then you can decide which one you want to go for. All right. I help running a contest every year for young writers. And I know that some of you are already part of that contest this year. So one thing that I wanted to request you guys is to keep this story separate from that contest, because I'm working with you on these stories. So I don't want, the other participants who are not part of this course to be at a disadvantage, right? So this story is not eligible, the story that we will develop here, for entry in Lunas Park yearly short story writing contest for young writers. But like I said, 3 ideas that you will come up with. You pick one in the end to develop as a story here. You may feel free to use other ideas to enter into the contest for Lunas Park. The second thing I was going to say, the story that you develop here is your story. Except for Lunas Park contest, if you want to enter that story anywhere in the world, feel free to do that. So with that, we are at the end of this session and I'm going to open up for questions. I am very, very, very respectful for your time. So if you want to drop, I'm not going to complain about it. But if you want to stay and ask me questions, this is the time. And my apologies, we were going to have some questions at the middle of the session, but because of late start today, because of technical issues, we didn't do that. So apologies for that. So now is the time for any questions you guys might have on previous assignment or the content we covered today.
Oh no, I was just saying thank you for doing this.
Sorry, you broke up there. At least I couldn't hear you. You mind repeating your question?
Pawan, she was just saying thank you for doing this.
You're most welcome. And I'll be very happy to see all of you become successful writers. So I'm very passionate, like Suresh mentioned last time, in educating a lot of young writers. And some of it goes back to my own experience as I was growing. I could have used this kind of help a lot. So thanks to each one of you for your passion and commitment to this class. And you're very welcome. My pleasure doing this. Go ahead.
So can you form 2 ideas together? Like it could be a subtle one, and then it could. Can you form it into with another idea that you have?
Yes, and it always happens, right? So when you have an idea, you know that you want to write a story about this character, who is this way, does this, then very often as a writer, you end up bringing a lot of things from your notes that you've noted in last 10 years, let's say, to kind of make them part of subplots. Novels are generally, they're huge in terms of number of ideas, number of themes, number of characters. So that is very typically what happens. So it's totally okay to merge ideas. Thanks. Good question.
Yeah, sorry. So can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is just relating to subplots kind of. So for example, I did The Great Gatsby for the story chart thing. And there's also, in The Great Gatsby, there's also this side plot about where Gatsby came from and his illegal businesses and stuff like that, which I didn't include because I didn't find it relevant to the main plot. So my question is, in general, is it better to leave the side plots out if they don't exactly pertain, or is it better to try to include them?
So if you just think about the goal of this exercise, summarize in 5 to 10 sentences, I think that was a wise thing to do.
Sorry, can I just have a follow-up question, if that's okay?
Sure.
Okay. Because that was a very specific assignment with a certain number of sentences. Yes, I understand that, but just for going forward, even not in this class, just assignments with the story chart, I'm just wondering that if the subplot does pertain to the main theme, because The Great Gatsby is about the American dream and the points that Fitzgerald's trying to make there. So that kind of sets up why it doesn't work, like that kind of aids in that, but it's not the main part, but it kind of aids in the main theme. So generally speaking, if you were to be given like an assignment, maybe with not a specific sentence count, but still trying to condense it, would you think it's generally better to leave those out? Or
I would say that depends on how many pages you get to describe it, right? It's all about what do you want to write when you have 1 page versus 10 pages versus 100 pages, right? And I do agree with you. That's an important element of the story. And the novel itself is not very thick, right? So it's, if I remember correctly, about like 150 pages, not even 200 pages. So if it can find its way in that, and that's one of the best books ever written, I would say it's very important plot, right? Subplot. So if you go to like 50 page, condense that writing into 50 page, I think that subplot will still find way, if that's what you're asking.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions. What other questions you guys have for me?
For this assignment, should our like ideas be like plot ideas, or should they be like character ideas? Like, are there any restrictions as to what you want us to write for this?
It's all up to you. And as writers, think about you're delivering a package. You're delivering an entertainment package to your reader, right? Think about that and think about what's the best way you can do that. So it can start with characters, it can start with subplots, can even start with the dialogue, right? You will say, this is a very good dialogue. Let me build on this. Who would say this? And why would that person say this? There's no limit. So that's the side of any creative field. You have to let your imagination travel as far as it can go. No constraints. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So it looks like there's no more questions. Highly appreciate you guys joining today's session. And I think we had a full house again. So highly appreciate your passion and commitment. So thank you very much. And I enjoyed all your assignments. And I can't tell you how excited I am for reading your ideas. So I will look forward to it. Maybe I can't wait till Wednesday to jump on them. All right. I enjoyed today's session. Hopefully you guys, got a lot from it as well, and I will look forward to session 3 next Saturday. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. And for one person in India, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.